Every year on the 4th of July, I get chills. It all goes back to what happened in 2017. I was 16 years old at the time and went to visit my uncle in the countryside of Indiana. He lives in a large farmhouse surrounded by farmland. The property has big fields, old trees, and a crooked white fence that looks like something from an old American postcard. I had been there a few times in the past, but this visit felt different. My aunt, uncle, and their 2 children looked after me for the weekend while my parents were away. That 4th of July was pretty relaxed, filled with hot dogs, music, and some fireworks. The town didn't host any major displays, so we lit our own fireworks out in the backyard. It was shortly after sunset. I was watching my younger cousins as they played with firecrackers. I stood up to grab a soda from the cooler, and that's when I glanced toward the tree line on the far side of the field. There was a young girl, probably 7 or 8, standing there holding a sparkler. She was wearing a vintage-looking dress, like something from the 1960s, and her socks were stained with dirt and mud. She didn't have shoes on, which struck me as really strange. Another odd thing was the sparkler she held. It wasn't flickering like a normal one would. It just stayed lit with a constant, intense glow. The sparks coming off it looked far too bright. I figured she might be a neighbor's kid, either lost or just curious about our celebration. So I started walking toward the tree line. Once I was close enough, I waved at her to let her know I saw her. She waved back and said, "Come light one with me." I told her, "Well, you can join us. My cousin has more firecrackers." She smiled at me, but something about approaching her suddenly felt like a mistake. I've met annoying kids before, the kind that make you question having any, but she gave me a different kind of fear. There was something unnatural in her wide smile and lifeless eyes that made me uneasy, but it felt too late to turn back. Without a word, she turned and sprinted into the woods. I thought about chasing after her, but then I noticed the ground where she had stood. The grass was scorched black beneath her feet. Even after she disappeared, the sparkler's light stayed in my eyes. I tried to brush it off that night. We all went to bed around midnight after finishing a movie. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom upstairs. I left the window cracked open a bit to let the cool air in and help me relax. Around 3 a.m., I woke up and saw light coming from under my door. I wondered if someone had left the hallway light on, but I was mistaken. When I opened the door, there was a sparkler sitting upright on the wooden floor. Someone had carefully wedged it between the floorboards to keep it upright while it burned. It wasn't throwing off sparks or smoke, just a solid white-hot flame like earlier. I stared at it, thinking maybe I was dreaming, when I heard soft giggling from the other end of the hall. It sounded like a little girl's laugh. I kept looking toward the pitch-dark part of the corridor. Seconds passed, then an entire minute. Suddenly, I heard the sound of feet running fast toward me. I couldn't see anyone, just the pounding of footsteps getting louder and faster. I ran back into my room and locked the door, breathing heavily and drenched in sweat. I had no idea what was going on. Then I heard that same laugh again, but this time it came from the corner of my room. I looked, and there she was, standing in the shadows, smiling straight at me. It was the same girl from the field, and her eyes were glowing faintly. She slowly leaned out from the darkness, and the sight of her face made my blood turn cold. Her mouth looked like it was on fire. Parts of her lips were melted shut, and other parts were cracked open. Her lips were dark, covered in blisters. Her hands were worse than her face. They were skinny and frail, and the skin looked burned all the way to the bone. A sparkler was stuck to her fingers, out burning into them. "Happy 4th of July," she screamed in a voice that sounded evil and inhuman. I was frozen in terror. I couldn't even scream. I blacked out completely. When I came to the next morning, I was lying on the cold floor, drenched in sweat. I raced down the stairs and told my aunt and uncle everything that happened. Their faces went pale as they listened to what I said. My uncle slowly sat down and began crying. My aunt gently pulled me to a seat, tears welling in her eyes, and then she shared a heartbreaking story. The girl I saw was actually my dad's cousin. Her name had been Sam. When she was 8 years old, she died in a fire during a 4th of July party. She had been alone in the barn lighting sparklers when one of them caught her dress on fire. People say she didn't scream. She walked calmly into the open field, burning and smiling, as if she couldn't even feel the flames. They brought out an old photo album and showed me a picture. It was definitely her. After the funeral, my grandparents kept the shoes she was wearing that day. The shoes were half melted and covered in burn marks. That's when I understood why Sam was standing there in just her socks. I still don't know why she chose to reveal herself to me. Maybe it was because I was the only one who didn't know what happened to her. Maybe she just wanted someone new to remember her story. I told my cousins about her too, hoping they'll never have to meet Sam like I did. This happened a few months ago during spring. It was that odd in-between time in my life, having just graduated with no real responsibilities yet and way too much free time. I had completed school a semester early, which seemed like a smart idea back when I was buried in assignments. But once I finally had all that free time, I didn't know what to do with myself. My full-time job wasn't starting until June, and most of my friends were still caught up with classes or finals. So until then, I was in limbo, feeling stuck between two stages of life. It actually made me feel really uneasy and kind of useless. I'm someone who always has to stay busy and productive, so sitting around for days just watching the time tick by was eating me up inside. That's probably why I agreed when my mom asked me to check in on my Uncle Jerry's beach house. It was a simple favor. Drive to Rehoboth Beach, make sure nothing was leaking or damaged, and take care of a few small tasks to save Jerry from hiring someone. Oh, and I should mention I'm from Pennsylvania, and Jerry's house is in Delaware, so the drive wasn't bad, just a little over 2 hours. The house is huge, the kind that easily holds my whole extended family each summer. 25 of us crammed into one place, playing games and drinking way too much. Those two things are honestly the only defining parts of our family traditions. The house isn't right on the shore, but it's not far from the beach either. It's located in a quiet neighborhood with tall beach grass and winding roads. Fast forward to some random weekday that I honestly can't even remember. I think it was a Thursday or something like that. I left later in the afternoon, which, looking back, was probably a bad idea. The drive itself was really peaceful. When I got to the house, everything looked normal. I went inside and went through Jerry's checklist. I checked the faucets, the breaker panel, and walked the grounds. Everything appeared fine. To be completely honest, it felt strange being alone there. I had never seen the house without random board games scattered everywhere and noisy relatives drinking. The silence was probably the creepiest part. The house just felt empty or abandoned. I'm sure most people have that one place, whether a house, a restaurant, or something else, that gets loud when the whole family is together. Now picture that same place completely quiet and still. Pretty unsettling, right? Anyway, it was getting late and I hate driving at night more than anything else. So I texted my mom and told her I'd stay overnight and head back in the morning. She said that was a good idea and reminded me to thank Uncle Jerry for letting me stay, which I did. I made something to eat, spent a bit of time on my phone, and then started getting ready for bed. Normally, during family trips, I'd end up squeezed into one of the small third-floor rooms while other relatives claimed the nicer ones. I'm not complaining about the setup, just saying how it usually works. Since I had the whole place to myself that night, I figured I'd take advantage. The master bedroom on the second floor has its own bathroom, a big walk-in closet, and an unbelievably comfortable bed. It wasn't a tough decision. I knew that's where I'd be sleeping. I got into bed around midnight and fell asleep quickly. I don't remember the exact time I woke up, just that something jolted me awake. I was still half asleep, but I was completely certain a noise had just come from the closet, like something had dropped inside without much sound. I turned my head toward the closet. Even that little movement made my heart race. My brain was awake, but my body didn't respond, like sleep paralysis without the actual paralysis. I was able to move, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to see what might be in that closet. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself to go back to sleep, and I almost did. But the exact moment I began to fall back asleep, I heard it. A soft thump from inside the closet. I opened my eyes just slightly and tried to convince myself I imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Like I was under some invisible weight, I lay there frozen with no control over my body at all. Unlike earlier, this time was real. I couldn't move even if I tried. Until then, I had never truly grasped what it meant to be frozen with fear. I listened in horror as the closet door slowly creaked open. Through barely opened eyes, I saw a shadowy figure walk into the room. It just stood beside the bed, completely still, watching me. Maybe 20 seconds passed, each one feeling impossibly long. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked out of the room. I didn't move, barely breathing. The footsteps moved across the floor, but instead of going downstairs like I thought, they went up to the third floor. My stomach dropped. That was the only staircase. There was no other exit from there. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but I was paralyzed by fear. There was no way I could take on a grown man. I had no clue if he had a weapon. All I could do was wait. After a few excruciating moments, I managed to break free from the fear. I quietly reached for my phone and dialed 911.
911, what's your emergency?
As soon as the dispatcher answered, I whispered as softly as I could that someone was inside the house. I slipped out of bed and quietly turned the lock on the bedroom door. Then I waited. Each minute crawled by until I saw red and blue lights flashing through the windows. I was honestly surprised by how fast the police showed up. I ran down the stairs, opened the front door, and almost collapsed in relief when I saw the officers. They didn't wait. They went inside immediately, moving quickly through the house. I stayed outside. It didn't take them long. They said the house was empty. I couldn't believe it. I had clearly heard the footsteps upstairs and there was nowhere else to go. That meant he had to still be inside. There was no other explanation. The police said he probably slipped by me and I was too panicked to notice. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I say? The guy was gone. I didn't feel right letting the officers just leave, so I called Jerry. Jerry wasn't having it. He snapped at the police and told them to search again, saying my life might have depended on it. So they did. They went through the house again, more carefully this time. Jerry told me to follow them and watch everything, so I did. The officers moved slowly, opening every closet and checking under every bed, tapping on the walls like they thought something might be hidden. They pulled back each shower curtain in the bathrooms and rechecked every lock on the doors and windows. That's when they found something. One of the windows in the third floor bedroom, the one I was supposed to sleep in, was unlocked. One of the officers stayed at the door while the other went downstairs and out to the back deck. I decided to go outside with him. mostly because the idea of being locked inside with a stranger was unbearable. The officer pointed his light around the yard but didn't see anything at first. Then he started scanning the roof, and to my horror, his flashlight landed on something terrifying. It was him. It was the same man who had been in the house. He was just sitting there on the roof. He looked disgusting, bald, wearing ragged clothes, and like he hadn't bathed in years. The next hour passed in a blur. The police talked to each other and eventually got him down and into cuffs. They said he was most likely homeless and had been living in the house for several days, maybe even longer. But when they asked how he got in, how long he'd been there, and why he hid in the closet, he didn't say a word. He just had that same creepy blank stare, like none of it mattered. Soon after, he was in the back of a police car, and that was the end of it. The whole experience was so unreal that I still can't make sense of it. No matter how much I think about it, I can't figure out why he picked that closet of all places to hide. Maybe he heard me come in and picked the first place he could find. I still have no idea how he got in, and Jerry doesn't either. There's no way to reach the roof from the ground, so that explanation doesn't make much sense. The rest of my family keeps urging Jerry to upgrade his home security, but he refuses every time. And for some reason, I can't stop thinking that if I had been in the room I was supposed to be in, things might have ended very differently. My name is Michael. This is a story my old friend Adam told me many times that happened to him many years ago. I recently asked him to write down a more detailed version, which he allowed me to share online because I always thought it was deeply unsettling. Adam was the kind of person you only needed to meet once to know he was the real deal. In his 50s, with a solid frame and skin worn from decades in salty air. He worked in marine salvage and handled coastal infrastructure. Basically, if something broke near the water, Adam was one of the first people you'd call to repair it. But he wasn't only a contractor. He had been a diver, a ship technician, and had even done remote inspections for the government. He had seen almost everything. So when he shared this story with me, I believed him without question. He said it happened back in 2013, when he was hired by a small county in Washington state to inspect an old decommissioned lighthouse. The county had taken over the property years earlier and had no clear idea what to do with it. Developers wanted to demolish it. Historians hoped to preserve it, but nobody wanted to cover the costs. So Adam's job was straightforward. Visit the place alone, inspect every part, and determine if it was even safe to consider restoring. The lighthouse sat on a remote rock island, about an hour off the mainland. It wasn't a big island either, just a chunk of stone and dirt, around 300 feet wide, with only the lighthouse, a generator shed, and some old rusted scaffolding left from decades ago. The place had been abandoned for years and wasn't any kind of tourist spot. There weren't even any docks, just a narrow ledge where a small Coast Guard boat could drop someone off during high tide. Adam packed light, 4 days worth of food, a sleeping bag, his tools, a clipboard, and a two-way marine radio. The plan was simple. He'd arrive Monday morning, complete a full walkthrough by Wednesday, and call in for pickup Thursday afternoon. He didn't think twice about being alone. This kind of job was something he'd done many times before. When he first arrived, everything was quiet, cold and cloudy, but calm. The air smelled like the usual mix of salt, rust, and rot that comes with long-abandoned coastal places. The lighthouse was tall, maybe 50 feet. Built in the early 1900s, it had the traditional spiral staircase that led up to the beacon room. The lens hadn't worked in decades, but the structure was still intact. Adam carried out his normal safety inspections: beams, stair conditions, and window frames. The floorboards on the bottom level were warped but still held weight. The second floor had a storage space that was empty except for some rusted metal cabinets. The third level contained a small sleeping area that clearly hadn't been used in decades. He eventually set his sleeping bag down on the ground floor near the generator room, where it was warmer and sheltered from the wind. The first night passed without incident. It was quiet, too quiet, Adam said. You don't realize how much sound the world normally makes until everything stops. There were no birds, no bugs, not even waves tapping the rocks outside. Just wind, and even that was faint. On the second morning, a heavy fog rolled in. Adam woke up to find everything outside swallowed in white. Visibility was no more than 5 feet beyond the window. He said it didn't look like any fog he'd seen before. It was so thick, it seemed solid, like a wall. Still, he wasn't alarmed. That area was known for dense fog. He spent most of that day taking notes on the upper stairwell. That's when he noticed something strange. Halfway up the stairs to the beacon room, there was a maintenance closet built into the wall. He had tried to open it on day one, but the hinges were too rusted to move. Now it was slightly ajar, just an inch or so, but enough to show it had been disturbed. He figured the moisture had loosened it, but he didn't like it. The closet's interior was pitch dark, and when he nudged the door open more, he saw something in the far corner. A wooden box, roughly the size of a lunchbox, covered in damp moss, like it had been underwater recently. He didn't try to open it. Instead, he closed the door again and made a note to report it later. That night, something woke him. It wasn't a noise exactly, more like the complete absence of sound, as if everything had stopped. Then he heard footsteps echoing on the metal stairs above. At first, he assumed an animal had wandered in, but then he noticed the steps weren't coming down. They were going up. Something inside the lighthouse was climbing higher. He flicked on his flashlight and stared toward the stairwell entrance, waiting. Nothing happened. Eventually, the footsteps stopped and silence returned. The next morning, he did a full search of the building, top to bottom. He checked every room and closet. He even climbed onto the roof, but found no signs of anything. No animals, no evidence of entry, except the box. It was now outside the closet, halfway out into the stairwell, still damp and moss-covered. Adam said he stood there for a long while, staring at it, unsure what to do. Eventually, he picked it up. It felt heavier than he had expected. The wood was swollen from moisture, and the lid wouldn't open. It had been nailed shut. He didn't want to force it open, so he set it at the base of the stairs and stepped outside for fresh air. That's when he saw something else. There were footprints in the dirt around the lighthouse. Not boot prints, but bare, wet feet. They trailed from the north side of the building toward the edge of the cliff, and then ended. There were no returning prints. Just 10 or 12 clear, barefoot tracks that stopped at a straight drop into the sea. Adam said he stood there a while trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone had come ashore? But the only boat scheduled was his pickup, and that wasn't due until the next day. He thought about using the radio to call in early, but the fog was still too thick. A rescue boat likely wouldn't even be able to approach safely. So he locked every door and hatch, then wedged an iron pipe across the stairwell entrance and tried to get some rest. That night was worse. At around 1:30 a.m., he heard the upper beacon room door slam with force. He said it hit so hard, dust shook loose from the ceiling. Then came the knocking. 3 slow taps on the inside wall of the tower. Not the front door or window, but the wall itself, as if someone was standing just behind the plaster, knocking with their knuckles. Adam didn't move. He lay still, frozen, until the sound faded. When daylight came, he checked the building again. The box was gone and the closet door was wide open. At that point, he knew he wasn't alone on that island. He grabbed his radio and called in for an urgent evacuation. The fog was still thick, but he told them it was a medical emergency. They said they would try to send a boat within a few hours. He packed his things and waited near the ledge where he'd been dropped off. The fog didn't lift. In fact, it only seemed to grow denser. He sat for nearly 7 hours, unable to see more than a few feet ahead. As the sun started to go down, the air grew colder. He heard footsteps again behind him, crunching through the gravel near the lighthouse. When he turned, there was no one there, or maybe someone was, hidden by the fog. He ran to the cliff's edge and stayed there until he finally heard the distant horn of the boat. They pulled him out just after dark. The deckhand who helped him aboard asked why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Adam just said the lighthouse was unsafe and needed to be sealed. He submitted a short report when he got back, said the structure was unstable and not safe for entry, but he didn't include anything about the footprints or the box. He said he left those parts out because he genuinely thought he might have been losing his mind from the isolation. That was near the end of the written account Adam sent me. He never returned to that lighthouse. He finished his remaining jobs that year and slowly stopped doing field work. Within a year, he'd quit taking new contracts, said he wanted to focus on dry land going forward. When I asked if it was because of the lighthouse, he just shrugged and said he'd seen enough out there. I pushed him once, only once, to tell me what he truly believed happened on that island. He looked straight at me and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Some places are meant to be left alone. They just need time and silence." That's all he said. I tried to look into the lighthouse myself not long after, but I couldn't dig up much. The coordinates scribbled in his notes don't match any documented structure. County records do mention a decommissioned tower off the coast, but there's no name and no accessible history. It's almost as if he had never been there at all. And that's what unsettles me the most. Not just what Adam said, but what nobody else ever did. I still don't know whether I should hope Adam was just losing his grip or not. My name is Adam, and I live in Georgia, not far from the Alabama state line. A few summers ago, I drove out to a small town in Alabama for a 4th of July cookout hosted by my college friend Antoinette. It was one of those backyard gatherings with paper plates, cheap fireworks, and way too much food. Honestly, it was one of the best nights I'd had in a long time. There were great people, a fun atmosphere, and kids playing with sparklers, all the good stuff. I didn't head out until a little after 10, which, looking back now, was probably my first mistake. That area of the state becomes really quiet after the sun sets. The drive back was going to take a little more than 2 hours. Most of the trip was back roads, long, empty 2-lane stretches surrounded by thick trees on both sides. Once in a while, I'd pass an old farmhouse or a small church with a gravel parking lot, but mostly it was just darkness surrounding me. I had the music turned down low, and I was still feeling good from the party. But I'll admit, there's something about driving through areas like that at night that always creeps me out, even if there's no reason to feel scared. I've always had a slight fear of the dark, and I'm sure that has something to do with it. Around 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I figured someone else had just gotten on the same back road. But the longer the car stayed behind me, the more I started paying attention. It was a gray Nissan Altima. That alone wasn't odd, except the bottom half of the car looked like it had been driving through a lot of mud. Every time we passed under an overhead light at a small crossing, I could see it clearly. Still, that by itself wasn't too strange. But after a while, I realized no matter how I adjusted my speed, the car stayed with me. At first, I assumed it might just be a coincidence. So I increased my speed a bit, maybe by 5 to 10 miles per hour, but the Altima did too. Then I lightly tapped the brakes and dropped well below the speed limit. Again, same result, the car didn't change position. On roads like that, it's normal for drivers to pass each other. In most places out there, it's not even against the law. I shifted slightly to the right a couple of times to signal that they could pass if they wanted, but they didn't take the opportunity. They just stayed exactly where they were, about 6 or 7 car lengths behind me. That's when I decided to try something out. There was a random left turn up ahead. It led onto what looked like a small residential road with maybe 4 homes spaced out on both sides. I turned left without thinking twice. I just wanted to get away from that car. Roughly 10 seconds later, the same car turned left as well, right there in the middle of nowhere. There was basically no chance they had any reason to be on that road. That's when I became completely sure they were following me. There wasn't any doubt left in my mind. I felt a horrible sensation in my stomach, like I was in serious trouble. And for all I knew, I probably was. At that point, my heart was pounding like it would if someone was pointing a gun at me. I'm not sure why, but that's the best comparison I can make. I felt completely helpless out there in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know what that person wanted or why they were tailing me, but every possibility I imagined only made me more afraid. I just wanted to reach a safe and public place with lights and people around. Right on cue, I heard that awful sound that warns your gas tank is almost empty. I swear, I've never felt more helpless than in that moment. My car is old, a 2012 Corolla that's had more than its fair share of issues. Sometimes the gas light gives me 20 miles, and other times I'm lucky to get 10. And in that part of the state, gas stations aren't exactly everywhere. I pulled out my phone and searched for the closest 24-hour station. The nearest one was more than 8 miles away. I didn't know if I could make it, but I didn't really have a choice. There was no way I was going to stop, not with that car still behind me. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't think they'd be able to do much way out there. Cops in that area can take forever to respond, and part of me felt like calling them would make everything feel even more real. I know it probably sounds silly, and I feel kind of embarrassed even admitting that, but I want to be honest about what I felt. A few minutes later, the gas needle dropped all the way to empty, not just low. I tried to keep calm, but I could feel myself starting to panic. Every little sound my car made seemed louder than usual. The road felt like it was stretching on endlessly. I felt ridiculous for being so powerless, but I had no clue how to fix it. I was sure I wouldn't reach the gas station. My mind kept running through all the things that might happen if my car stalled. But somehow I finally saw the glowing sign of a gas station up ahead. Honestly, I nearly cried from relief. I took the turn sharply and pulled into the lot as quickly as I could, hoping to buy myself time to get inside. And that's exactly what I did. I leapt out of the car and ran inside, barely bothering to shut the door behind me. From inside the store, I could still see the Altima through the window. It slowed to a stop at the edge of the lot and just sat there for about 10 seconds, engine still running. No one got out. It seemed like whoever was inside was trying to decide whether or not to keep following me. Then out of nowhere, the car sped off quickly and disappeared back down the road we'd come from. I told the guy working in the gas station what had happened, and he offered to call the police. Even after speaking to the police, I still felt deeply unsettled. I know it's not the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to someone, but there's no explanation that doesn't involve that driver having bad intentions. That feeling of intense fear, I really hope I never go through that again. I made it home safely and promised myself I'd never take back roads late at night again. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, something else happened that made my stomach sink again. I was sitting at home one evening with the news on. It was really just background noise when a segment caught my attention. It was about two men wanted for armed robbery, attempted murder, and other crimes in rural Alabama. They showed a blurry security camera image and mentioned the suspects were believed to be driving a stolen gray Nissan Altima, last seen heading east. The moment I heard that, I froze. I knew without a doubt that was the car that had followed me. I felt it in my gut. I couldn't prove it was the same person who had followed me that night, but I'm telling you, I knew. The timing fit, the area lined up, and the car description matched almost perfectly. I went to the police right away to share my story, and that's when it all really hit me. My hesitation might have allowed two extremely dangerous people to get away. I can't forgive myself for not calling the police sooner, and I still think about it often. I never got any updates from the authorities, and I haven't seen any follow-up reports on the news. If anything new comes up, I'll be sure to share an update.